we are pivoting to one of the nicest parts of any meeting, which is our awards. And this afternoon, we are presenting two distinguished awards. And I will start the Patrick Suppes Prize. The Patrick Suppes Prize was established and funded in 2006 by Patrick Suppes, a member of the Society for 22 years until his death in 2014. The Patrick Suppes Prize honors accomplishments in three very different and deeply significant scholarly fields that reflect the spectacular scope of his own interests. The prize rotates each year between philosophy, psychology, and the history of science. Ruth Schwartz-Cowan, chair of the selection committee, will present this year's award.
The recipient of the 2021 Patrick Suppes Prize in the History of Science is Jessica Riskin, professor of history at Stanford University, for her book, The Restless Clock, a history of the centuries-long argument over what makes living things tick. In this book, Riskin provides fresh and sophisticated insights into the long history of the biological debate between vitalism and mechanism. Since the late 17th century, vitalistic thinkers have argued that although organisms could be analogized to mechanisms, they needed to be understood as inspirited mechanisms, having their source of motion, of change, of transformation, of development within themselves. That is, to borrow a term from Leibniz, organisms are restless clocks. Mechanists, beginning with Descartes, have argued the opposite, that organisms are indeed akin to clocks, but they are clocks in need of winding, entirely passive mechanisms that have to be set in motion by an external agent. For most of the 18th century, that external agent was thought by mechanists to be God. But by the early 19th century, as natural philosophy was turning into science, God was becoming unacceptable as a cause of natural phenomena. And this meant that most progressive biological scientists were thinking vitalistically, not deistically. They were assuming that movement, change, development, and even the evolution of species were inherent natural characteristics of organisms. Thus, Riskin argues, the long and successful struggle to banish agency from scientific explanation in the physical sciences was not replicated in the sciences that were focused on organisms. Her argument is based on primary sources that span the late 17th century to the present. She analyzes the language in which philosophers and scientists discussed automata in the late 17th and 18th centuries, cells and fertilized eggs in the 19th, robots, artificial intelligence, and epigenetics in the 20th and the 21st. Riskin convincingly demonstrate that progress in the biological sciences was made possible because scientists conceived of movement and transformation and change as inherent in living beings. Because, in other words, they used a vitalistic heuristic to think naturalistically about organisms. Riskin thus makes a persuasive case that no matter how rigorous and how naturalistic they claim to be, scientists who study organisms today still find the language of biological agency useful, even indispensable. In other words, the old tension between mechanism and vitalism remains with us, and this has been a very good thing for the progress of the biological sciences. Our committee believes that Patrick Suppes would have celebrated precisely this aspect of your book, Jessica, that you drew a conclusion about the epistemological development of the biological sciences using historians rather than philosophers' insights. Our guess is that he also would have been delighted to know that the prize that bears his name was awarded in 2021 to a member of the Stanford faculty, the university at which he spent the whole of his long and very distinguished academic career. Congratulations.
Well, thank you so much for this. I hope you can hear me. I just want to pop up briefly to say my thanks. I want to tell you that the news of this prize actually came to me totally unexpectedly out of the blue at a very dark, bleak moment of the pandemic. I was in Paris. We were totally locked down under curfew. It was a dark, cold winter, and I was sort of sitting sadly, disconsolately at my computer, and suddenly up pops this message that says, "Congratulations on the Patrick Suppes Prize." And so, of course, the news that colleagues had read and valued my book would have been huge for me at any time. And I immediately looked up the list of prize committee members and found all these people for whom I have enormous admiration. And so, this was just a tremendous feeling, but all the more so at that moment, because it was really like a sort of lifeline back into the world of conversations and exchanges with other people. And it meant that people were reading and responding and still out there. And so, this is just all by way of saying that I want to really thank the society and the members of the prize committee with all my heart, and tell you also that you make me want to go on writing books, even despite all the trouble they cause. You give me a heart to keep going. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Jessica and Ruth. And finally, the Karl Spencer Lashley Award was established in 1957 by a gift from Dr. Lashley, a member of the society and a distinguished neuroscientist and neuropsychologist. His entire scientific life was spent in the study of behavior and its neural basis. Lashley's famous experiments on the brain mechanisms of learning, memory, and intelligence helped inaugurate the modern era of integrative neuroscience, and the Lashley Award recognizes innovative work that continues exploration in that field. Bill Newsom, chair of the Lashley Award Selection Committee, will present the award.
It is my pleasure to announce that the 2021 Karl Spencer Lashley Award is awarded to Patricia K. Kuhl in recognition of her fundamental discoveries concerning how human infants acquire language and how brain structure and activity changes during language learning in both monolingual and bilingual children. Dr. Kuhl is the Bezos Family Foundation Chair in Early Childhood Learning and co-director of the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences at the University of Washington. Pat Kuhl is a preeminent leader in the investigation of language learning and bilingual brain development in human infants. She used behavioral techniques to examine the window of time when infants begin to distinguish native from non-native language sounds, and demonstrated that this transition in early speech perception predicts infants' future language growth. She pioneered brain measurements in young children during language learning, laying down fundamental metrics of how and when the infant brain responds to language sounds. Her astonishing findings include showing that the human auditory system begins losing sensitivity to sounds from non-native languages as early as 10 months of age. However, robust plastic changes can occur in infants' language circuits if they experience immersive social exposure to a second language. Kuhl's work has illuminated the behavioral, neurobiological, and social dimensions of language learning, in the process spurring subsequent generations of researchers to highly creative research in this critical field. She will be the first Lashley awardee recognized for work on human behavioral neuroscience since Marcus Rakel and Michael Posner in 1998. It is my great pleasure to present the Karl Spencer Lashley Award to Dr. Patricia K. Kuhl.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was a tremendous introduction. I'm so very proud humbled and honored to receive this award and have my name added to that list of very distinguished scientists who have received it in the past. I thank the selection committee deeply, bottom of my heart, for this award. When I think about my career development, the thing that stands out to me is my postdoctoral years, where I had the incredible fortune to travel among 4 different laboratories, each of which had pretty diametrically opposed ideas about the acquisition of language. Language has always gathered a lot of debate, but it was an incredible time in the 70s when everyone was debating. It seemed as though everyone was debating the origins of language. My postdoc was based at Washington University, where the auditory psychophysicist said to learn and understand speech, really understand the auditory system. But at the same time, I was traveling to Yale, where Al Liberman was promoting the motor theory of speech perception. And for him, the understanding of gestures, how do we seek the gestures as we listen to speech, was the key, a very different view. Also at that time, I was visiting MIT regularly, where my friends Ken Stevens and Dennis Klatt, engineering scientists, were approaching speech from a recognition standpoint. How does a machine recognize speech? How do we deconstruct, see it as a deconstruction experiment, and creating machines that could talk? The fourth place that influenced me strongly was Rockefeller University's ethologists. So Millbrook's Field Station, where the birdsong work was going on, Peter Marler, Mark Konishi, and Fernando Notabaum. So what was interesting is that my goal was to design experiments that each of these four groups would be interested in. And that was difficult, challenging, and wonderful. It taught me to take perspectives and to design experiments very carefully. I think this idea of starting to think about perspectives began in my home at dinner time, where my parents, and especially my father, wanted to hear his 5 children debate an issue every night at dinner. I relished that opportunity and have loved that experience ever since. And then finally, I met and married developmental psychologist Andrew Meltzoff, whose own findings have revolutionized our thoughts about what babies can do. And we met over designing an experiment. And that experiment ended up being published in Science, and it produced a marriage and a daughter whose name now is Catherine Stavropoulos, who herself is an associate professor at the University of California at Riverside and co-director of the Autism Center there. So those two, Andy and Catherine, have had my back forever, and understanding how a woman in science who was in love with the science and in love with that life would not always be there to bake cookies and take care of dinner, but they supported me, had my back forever. I'll never be able to thank them enough. So to all of the people who have influenced my life so profoundly, thank you so much. I am very grateful to have this award.
Thank you. Speaking as a grandmother of a baby who's being raised in an English-speaking household with a Spanish-speaking nanny who we have encouraged to speak Spanish, I'm very interested. I'm going to look up some of your published work and pass it on to my daughter.
Linda, that's exciting. That's exciting. You're doing the right thing.
So this ends our first part of our Thursday session.